All right, now let's get reaction on this. We are now joined via Zoom by OUTA's Chief Executive Officer, Wayne Duvenage. Wayne, I mean, just leading up to this policy statement, a lot of talk around potentially what government was doing around e-tolls. Your reaction to what the minister said?
Well, thank you. Yeah, the minister clearly has indicated that the GFIB bonds, the Gauteng Freeway Improvement bonds, will now be settled and the interest thereon by National Treasury's allocation of over 23 billion rand, and that a third of this would be picked up by the province. Now, what he's referring to there is that province is going to be responsible, and it has always been responsible for its own freeway network upgrades. It's got another few phases to go, by the way, the Gauteng Freeway Improvement Project. And he's clearly indicating that that's now going to rest more and more in their laps as opposed to Treasury. And there's nothing wrong with that. What his message today is clearly signaled is that there's no need to continue with e-tolling as the funding mechanism for those Gauteng freeway bonds, which essentially means it is the end of e-tolls. And we believe the Minister of Transport, as he has indicated, will be announcing this shortly. And what that really means is they've got to declare these Gauteng roads as non-tolled roads so that we can move on with this chapter once and for all. It's taken them a long time, but we have finally got there.
Am I getting a sense, an indication that you are excited? Because on some quarters, those that are very cynical are saying that this doesn't necessarily mean that it is a complete scrapping of e-tolls, because Gauteng will still have to carry the burden of maintaining, a lot of these roads.
Yeah, well, Gauteng maintains a lot of their roads as it is right now. But it is the end of e-toll. In other words, the drive now, pay later electronic scheme that has failed completely will not be taken over by Gauteng province. Panyaza Lesufi and his predecessor have all indicated they will get rid of the e-tolling scheme. They may use the gantries, by the way, for average speed over distance monitoring and traffic fines. And of course, so they can raise revenue through the e-toll mechanism, the transaction clearinghouse is what it's called or known as. But charging people to drive on the Gauteng freeway network isn't going to happen. It may be that they will put up other toll plazas on some other routes where you can do so without creating more congestion. Just as the Western Cape has tolled the Chapman's Peak Road, province does have opportunities to toll. In fact, long before e-tolls, province was talking about introducing a tolling scheme on one or two of their areas. Remember, tolling is either done through a boom system, which has a 100% hit rate. The boom doesn't rise until you pay. But if you try and introduce those onto freeway networks, congested freeway network, it creates a mess, which is why Sanral tried to introduce an electronic tolling scheme. But that scheme, as we all now know, and Sanral knows, has failed completely, because you can't introduce that scheme in an environment where NATIS is incorrect, it is not accurate, it's not reliable. You need an efficient post office, you need efficient enforcement mechanisms. None of those were in place, which is why the scheme was always going to fail, and it took them 10 years to realize that.
And of course, the concern is, Sanral has, since 2014 at least, received over 20 billion rands, for the Gauteng Freeway Improvement Project plan, from the fiscus. And the concern, of course, is, what happens then to all these monies and the recovery thereof?
Well, all that's happened is Sanral has been funded, as we've suggested they do, through National Treasury allocations. They've already received, as you said, over 22 billion rand since 2014. They're now getting another 24 billion rand from National Treasury, because it seems like they haven't settled all of that debt, although it was only a 21 billion rand. Well overpriced, by the way, because the freeway cost them 2 to 3 times the amount they should have paid. That's another story. So it's not like, those allocations in the past have been settling the debts, and this new allocation will just finalize that process. And there will be no outstanding debt, or if they want to try and collect it from those who haven't paid, they've got another surprise coming their way. I think they recognize they're never going to collect the outstanding 9 billion rand from the motorists. That is why Treasury has allocated these additional funds. I think this is a very important chapter for civil society, who stood strong on this issue. And hopefully a very important lesson for government to never introduce complex and irrational schemes of this nature without the backing of society and the public. Otherwise, they are going to fail, which is exactly what's happened. So Treasury has sent a clear signal. There's no need to continue with e-tolling as the funding mechanism for GFIP. And this is the end of e-tolls, without a doubt.
Wayne, quickly, before I let you go, just your overall impression then on the, medium-term policy budget statement by the minister, particularly on just economic growth prospects. I mean, you touched on civic society and some of the hardships that we are having to deal with in this country because of largely, again, just globally what is currently transpiring.
Yeah, I think the minister announced that, there are international pressures that are outside of our control, and we have to balance the books, taking into account those stresses and strains. He's indicated that they might take on a sizable portion of Eskom's debt, which is both the ramifications for and against. But I think for as long as Eskom has that debt noose around its neck, it's not going to have the operating funds it needs to maintain and keep the electricity prices from down, as opposed to increasing by the 20 to 30% per annum, which has other dire consequences for economic growth and business. So I think it's overall we need to unpack a little bit more of what he said and what's going to come in the next budget. But he has a very difficult time ahead, and I think Enoch Godongwana is an astute minister who is going to manage the books of this country a lot better.
Wayne, appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you so much for that. OUTA's Chief Executive Officer, Wayne Duvenage, of course, also commenting on the overall midterm budget, but also Gauteng's problematic e-toll related debt, which will now be split between the national and the provincial government, something a lot of, at least people from Gauteng have been expecting.